That's what they request.
Call to order this City Council special meeting for City of East Grand Forks. Tuesday, June 25th, 2019 is now 5 o'clock. City Clerk, please call roll.
Mayor Seegander.
Here.
Council President Mark Olstead.
Here.
Council Vice President Chad Grassel. Council Members Clarence Vetter.
Here.
Dale Helms. Tim Riepel.
Here.
Tim Johnson.
Here.
Mark Demers.
Present.
Does term quorum. Number 1, consider adopting resolution number 19-06-39, approving the year-end transfers for budget year 2018. Is there a motion?
Almost.
Moved by Riepel. Is there a second? Motion by Riepel. Is there a second?
I'll second it, but
Second by Demers. Questions or discussion?
I guess can we just go through what these are, please?
Absolutely. The first one is the EDA transfer. This is, of course, in our budget. The EDA does not have their own funds, and so they have their own account, which is in the 620 fund. However, we do budget for a transfer from the general fund, which is the 101 fund, to pay for all of their expenses for that year. So they budget 181, and the amount we transferred was 182, so they were over a little bit. The senior center parking, we repaired the parking lot. Fund 415 is our project fund, and Fund 101 is our general fund. And so this is the amount that we paid for the parking lot to get repaired. So a transfer had to be gone from the general fund to the project fund.
Was there a budgeted amount for that?
The project, we have budgeted $68,000, and
Oh, I
the
see. Sorry.
cost was $86,000. Okay, next one, to distribute the tax levy, the 2015 bond. This is the principal payment for the 2015 bond. Most of it is for the water's edge. By law, we have to put that in our tax levy. And so a transfer is made from the general fund from 101 to the bond fund of 533. The next one is tax rebates. This is the program that we have for new homes in the city of East Grand Forks. I believe it's a 2-year program. We budgeted 45, and we actually, the total was 72,000, and we pay for it out of Fund 101, which is the general fund, but we get reimbursed from the 280 fund, which is a housing fund. Next one is the cemetery budget. The cemetery is in a special revenue fund. It does collect revenue for lots and plots sold for for different things in the cemetery.
Mausoleums.
The columbarium?
Yeah, well, they're considered the plots too, yeah. So anyway, excuse me. So the cemetery is in Fund 214. We budgeted 27,000 of a transfer out of the general fund. We actually spent 38,000. Next one is the 16 CP3S. It's safe route to schools, bike rack, the city share. The total project was 16,000. It was actually completed in 16. However, I did not have the information. It was completed in 17, excuse me. Didn't have the information. We hadn't been reimbursed by the federal government yet. And however, there is a local match on that. There was some problem because we couldn't get reimbursed for the bike racks because we couldn't prove that they were made with American steel. Otherwise, the federal government wouldn't pay us for them. So a transfer was done out of the general fund, project fund that we budget in, and it was paid to pay for the project out of the 415 fund, which is the city project fund. Next one is the Kennedy Bridge Trail. That's when they were doing the repair work on the Kennedy Bridge, the trail from the bridge down to, that hooks into our regular bike trail. We budgeted 33,000, was actually only 23,000. So we took the transfer from the general fund into our project fund. Next one is the 15AG2, which is the Point of Woods Fund project, which was the 25,000 that the city paid for the share in the new project. We budgeted 25, it was actually 27,000 after it was all paid. So we reimbursed Fund 414, which is our assessment job project fund. Next one is the 18 AJ State Municipal Aid, and we actually had to do a transfer there because it was put in the federal fund, federal aid fund, and we actually put it to the project because it was part of the state aid funds that we actually asked for ahead of time for construction dollars. And so it came into our federal aid fund. We had to transfer to our special projects assessment jobs fund. The next ones are, Coke gave us pouring rights for our arenas, and the first check was in 2016 for $27,500, and for the next 9 years, they're going to give us $2,500. When the money came in, it was decided that that was going to go towards the purchase of a new Zamboni, which we purchased this year. So the transfer from Fund 400, which is our grant fund, we transfer that to the 703 fund, which is actually our capital improvement financing fund, because big dollar items and equipment, we pay for it out of the capital financing fund, and then we repay that fund every year through the general fund within each department. So that just reduced the payment and the cost of the equipment. Any other questions?
Mr. Demers.
Thank you. So for the top few items that are coming out of the general fund, where does that put us then for reserve balance?
I just received a draft for our audit and financial statements today, because they're due on Saturday. And we do have a positive balance after our general fund, and we will be increasing our reserves.
Okay, because it looks like a lot of these are higher than the budgeted amounts.
Correct. And a few of our items, revenue was a little higher than we expected in some other areas, and so we do have a positive fund balance. And so Brady's will come and present that audit and report to us, and then we can actually use it towards budgeting, which is the next thing we'll move into.
Anything else, sir?
And then just, is the tax rebate, is that on trend then? Like the 75 versus 45, is that going to be, should we be adjusting that for our next cycle? Or
Paul should have, we kind of have an idea of what's coming, so we do adjust that budget accordingly.
because then does that affect what that 280 fund balance is quite a bit? So where are we with that then?
As of today, or excuse me, as of May 31st, the fund, 280 fund was at a negative about $20,000. And just a reminder, the 280 fund also, we're doing the projects, those $100,000 projects, which actually, keeps rolling over. But the biggest source for revenue in that fund is a loan we have to Valley Golf that they're repaying to us, which is $3,000 a month, so it's $18,000 a year, and then lot sales. So if a lot is sold that the city owns, the amount on the lot that is the difference between what we're carrying it as, and we take off the specials, we pay off the specials, that amount actually replenishes that fund.
Does that debt, or not debt, that deficit include the $72,000 transfer?
Yes.
So
Yes.
So it's 50,000 or so to the plus right now. After the transfer, it'll be.
Well, no, this is as of 12/31/2018. So we already had to do the transfer for on the books. They just had to be approved, and I didn't bring them in until we were finalized with their testing on the audit in case there was any other changes. And if you would like me to do that differently, I can do that. I mean, I can bring what I have at the time or wait till the audit is complete.
Are we projected to have enough revenue over the course of 19 to bring that back up to zero at least? Or are we going to be in the hole?
I would not expect lot sales and home sales generally are soft right now, so I would not expect to have home sales in the quantity that are needed to do that.
Typically, that fund does run in the hole. Just,
I mean,
but we do, like I said, we do use that 100,000, and we're doing 2 homes right now?
I don't know that there are any on the books right now, because I think we just did the last one. But you got, the other things that come out of there are the landscaping rebates, and that goes for all the new homes in the community, and the 72,000 of rebates are for all the homes in the community, not just restricted to city lots. And the only source of revenues are Valley Golf, the loan repayment, and the lot sales. So that there's not very much income coming in compared to what the expenditures are.
And what's the recovery time for those $100,000 loans? Or when do you
We're
foresee?
not giving any more $5,000 loans.
No, the $100,000.
100,000? Generally, we receive the money in anywhere from 9 to 12 months.
So we have 2 of those out or 3?
We do not have any.
Oh, we don't have any of those, okay.
The other thing that does, revenue that might come in, so if somebody did get that incentive loan that we were giving out, now that we discontinued them, if they haven't lived in the home for 10 years, they do have to repay back the total of $5,000. And we get probably about 5
About
of those.
70% of them come back to us. And we've had one, there was one just a few days ago.
That's all I have, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? I see none. Roll call, please.
Vetter,
Yes.
Helms, Riepel,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Olsted,
Yes.
Demers.
Yes.
Motion is carried. Number 2, consider adopting resolution number 19-06-40, setting the fee to the UTV permit process at $30 for a 3-year period. A motion.
Move.
Moved by Demers.
Second.
Second by Riepel. Any questions or discussion? See none. Roll call, please.
Vetter,
No.
Riepel,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Olsted,
Yes.
Demers.
Yes.
Motion is carried. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move.
Moved by Riepel.
Second.
Second by Vetter. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion is carried. Meeting is adjourned. Call to order the council work session for City of East Grand Forks for June 25th, 2019 is now 5:12. City Clerk, please call roll.
Mayor Steve Gander.
Here.
Council President Mark Olsted.
Here.
Council Vice President Chad Grassel. Council Members Clarence Vetter.
Here.
Dale Helms, Tim Riepel.
Here.
Tim Johnson.
Here.
Mark Demers.
Present.
Does stir quorum. Number 1, updated Minnesota Highway 220 corridor. Jairo.
Thank you. Thank you, councilors. Thank you for the opportunity. Today, we have our consulting engineer, Engineer Michael Anderson, and also we have a representative from Minnesota DOT, Ms. Michelle Roger-New, and both of them will address rather quickly an update of what has been transpiring with the advancement of the Minnesota 220 North corridor study. So the purpose today is just to give you a final view and also to provide you with some insights coming from the steering committee this afternoon. So I will leave Mr. Michael and then Michelle with you.
Thanks, Jairo. Council members. Yes, as Jairo mentioned, we're here to report on really what's the conclusion of the Highway 220 corridor study. I have a short presentation to talk about a little bit of the summary of the study and then really to highlight the recommendations that are being made. This study was completed in collaboration with the MPO, the City of East Grand Forks, MnDOT, and a number of the business and stakeholders along the corridor. The study did follow a pretty strong public participation process along the way. We had 5 steering review committee meetings, a public open houses, a website. We did also engage with the community through an online opinion survey and to get some of that feedback from the community. And I'd like to highlight a little bit of what came out of that survey results. We did have 52 respondents that provided their opinions to us. Most of these folks resided along the corridor, traveled it daily. Really what came out of it was the top 3 most concerning intersections to the community were the US 2 intersections, 17th Street and 23rd Street, followed by the 4th rank being that there are no concerns along the corridor. But really those top 3 concerns are exactly the top 3 concerns that were identified through the technical analysis process of the study as well. So there was a correlation there. What we heard from those folks is that the safety concerns relative to the corridor were largely surrounding speed and aggressive driving. There's a perception that these intersections are dangerous for crossing, and then also it's difficult to make left turns. What we heard is the top improvement strategies were to address improved crosswalks, traffic signal roundabout, really traffic control device changes, and then pedestrian bicycle facilities along the corridor. What we did here through the entire study process and the public engagement piece of this is that there was a consistent concern noted relative to trucks and agricultural vehicles along the corridor, and the improvement strategies that we have identified through the study specifically address and acknowledge those vehicles along here, and it is an important consideration in the recommendations that we were making. To kind of summarize the study process here, the goals of this study really were very consistent with what we heard. What the community that we got back from the survey is very consistent with what the objective of this study was to accomplish. And so that objective, as we looked at the improvement alternatives for the corridor, really focused on 4 primary things, and that was improving access control along the corridor, was improving mobility, capacity issues, really was to improve safety at intersections, and then to improve the pedestrian crossings and connections along the corridor. The study recommendations and implementation plan really specifically address these issues raised. The improvements are anticipated to improve safety at the intersections. The mobility capacities will be improved in accommodating the future growth into the future. And then addressing multimodal deficiencies and connection gaps in the system. Really, the improvements are to focus and balance the needs of all the users. So as we look at these intersections, there are competing needs amongst who's using the intersections for mobility versus multimodal. So the strategies really are to balance those needs and to be a system that's safe and best for all users of the network. And the study here this is a planning study. The recommendations in here really are calling for the highest ranked improvements and feasible alternatives that may be carried forward into a further design development process, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the slides. And then ultimately, the result of this study is an implementation plan that prioritizes these improvements over the next 25 years and gives the MPO and the agencies here a tool to start programming for these future improvement projects. The implementation plan here was broken into 3 primary phases: a short, mid, and long-term strategies. So 0 to 5 years being the short term, 5 to 15 years midterm, and then long-term being 2035 and beyond. The improvements that were identified over the next 5 years in the short term, number 1 is the improvement here to address and improve the crosswalk at 17th Street, the south leg of that intersection. We anticipate that this would be a 100% MnDOT cost associated with this improvement. And that improvement really there is to shorten that crossing, provide an ADA accessible access that's improved over what's there currently, and to make that crossing a bit more comfortable for those that use it. Other improvements identified in the short term were addressing the lane drop pavement markings at 9th Street to 10th Street to better configure that lane alignment at that intersection and get that lane drop out of the curve. Other improvements were minor things like bus stop signing improvements. And then also at 10th Street, there's some concern relative to the utility boxes on the corner, obstructing view of that corner. So that has been identified as something to be looked at in the short term. In the midterm, year 2025 to 2035, we've identified a number of sidewalk connections to establish. But the big 2 improvements here really related to the signalized intersection of 14th and US 2. Both of those traffic signal systems are nearing the end of their useful life. They are in need of replacement, and that replacement time is in this time frame horizon. So what the study has identified is that at 14th Street, that traffic signal system be replaced and rebuilt with an improved system that meets current standards, and some operational efficiency improvements be made along with that. We'd anticipate that that would be a 50-50 split cost participation between MnDOT and local agency. At the US 2 intersection, the improvement recommendation there is traffic signal replacement, operation, and geometric improvements. And the geometric improvements there are to provide a double left turn lane eastbound, offset left turn lane alignment eastbound, westbound, and then some signal operation improvements with flashing yellow arrow indications. And I should mention the other geometric improvement is the right turn channelization to remove those chop islands and to align those corners better for sight and visibility improvements. This one here would be from a cost participation largely MnDOT, although the demers leg is city responsibility at about 25% for this intersection. Long-term improvements, those that are out there beyond 2035, again, were some additional sidewalk connections to be established, some bus stop improvements, but the two big improvements here in the long term are related to 17th Street and 23rd Street. Both locations to improve the intersection control at those intersections. The timeline for those improvements in some respect would coordinate with a future pavement rehabilitation project that MnDOT anticipates to occur in the mid-2030s for the concrete paving along that roadway. So the timeline would make sense that these two improvements be looked at along that similar time frame for coordinating the work. So really the next step from this study here is for the improvement strategies that have been identified for the MPO to adopt and or amend those into the 2045 transportation plan, and then look for the opportunity for some of those improvements to be placed into the transportation improvement program, which then would also get attached to the MnDOT state transportation improvement programming for allocation of funding and programming for construction. The longer term improvements could be good candidates for the 10-year capital highway investment plan through the MnDOT, where that's programmed out to 2029 currently, but improvements that we've identified long term could be good potential candidates for that future program. Other funding sources that local agencies might start to consider as you look to advance some of these improvements include the local partnership program. It's a program between MnDOT and local agencies for cost sharing of improvements. The Northwest Area Transportation Partnership, which is funding that can be used once every 4 years in this area. There could be some of the smaller projects that have been identified, sidewalk or signing, could be city local operation maintenance funds through a discretionary program to do those improvements. And then there's a bunch of opportunities that these projects could be solicited for through the Transportation Alternatives Program or Highway Safety Improvement Program, Safe Routes to Schools, and there's other grant programs out there that local agencies can kind of look to for funding opportunities. I'll comment a little bit on the design development process. So out of this study, there are really three major, we call them major future projects that would follow a design process like this. Those are the US 2 and 220 intersection improvements, 17th Street and 23rd Street. So what this study is really, if you look at this graph here, is we're in the first 2 years. Really is the first step is the planning study, and is to identify the need, the feasible alternatives, and then the plan. The next step here is to amend these into the transportation plan and then identify them in a transportation improvement program for funding. At that point, a construction year can be established. Once that construction year is established, about 3 to 5 years before that, the design development process would occur for these projects. And at that time, what that really means is that each of these three projects will be looked at again. The alternatives that have been identified in this study will be finalized. The final improvement measures will be identified at that time for each intersection. There will be a public involvement, stakeholder engagement process again. An actual preliminary design, layout, and engineering will be completed. And some of these might be subject to some additional environmental review that would occur under that design development process as well. And ultimately, that's when the municipal consent and agency approvals would occur, and then a final design process would happen at that point in the future before construction. That's what I have. So any questions or discussion relative to the conclusion of the 220 corridor study?
Do you have any questions on that study portion? Doesn't look like it. Michelle, do you have anything or no? Okay. No one has anything. I appreciate it. They could explain it pretty well.
I guess if I was going to say anything at all, it is thanks again for working with our community members to bring it to this point. Now, thanks for taking it to that next step and prioritizing and finding funding inside MPO and all these other sources. It's a good process. It's many, many steps involved, but that's how you don't put infrastructure that you didn't need or that you get the stuff that you need the most. So as much as it's a bit of an exhaustive process, I like it, and I think it yielded the kind of results that we wanted. So thanks to all of you locally and then all of you who've come in to work with it. I think this is going the right direction.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, move on to number 2, review of report of feasibility for 6th Avenue Northeast improvements. Mr. Emery. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess as the council's aware, the city did receive a petition from the property owners on 6th Avenue Northeast, located between 4th Street Northeast and Business Highway 2, requesting the 6th Avenue Northeast be improved with curb gutter and paving. And they've also requested that the project be completed as an assessment project. So really the first step in that process is for us to complete a report of feasibility, which we have completed, is included in your packet. So I guess kind of looking at the report of feasibility, street improvements, again, would be curb and gutter, paving, putting in an adequate base with drain tile. And then as far as drainage improvements, I think at this point I did include in the estimate the addition probably of some storm sewer, a couple catch basins along that stretch, just to improve our overall drainage. So with that, right now I'm estimating, as far as the drainage improvements go, estimating about $47,826. Estimated street improvements, $399,593 essentially, which puts our estimated total project cost at $447,419.73. And again, since this would basically be new construction, 100% of that total project cost would be assessed. So with that, looking at an estimated assessment rate for the drainage improvements, about 29 cents per square foot. And for the street improvements, we're looking at about $262.53 per front foot of end benefit. The areas to be proposed to be assessed would be basically the properties on both sides of 6th Avenue there, but we basically got properties within the MGI Grain re-subdivision, blocks 1, lot 1, and block 1, lot 1 and 2. And then within the replat of block 2 and block 3 of Burlington Northern Industrial Park area, lots 3, 4, and 5 within block 2. So I guess, we feel that, the project as described does provide benefit to those properties. So we do see the project as feasible. I did include, kind of for your information, I did include a preliminary assessment roll, so you kind of get a feel for what the estimated assessment rates are. Very expensive project for the property owners, but many of them own pretty much the whole stretch there, so like I said, I think, you know, most of the businesses we're dealing with here, I mean, like when Randy Bushy was in here last week, he went through the same thing on 7th here, you know, a few years ago. So I think he knows what to anticipate. So I did include that. And then, so really the next step in the overall process would be to hold an improvement hearing with the residents, providing them with this information, and then I guess just kind of seeing if they're still interested in, you know, moving ahead and having plans and specs and stuff prepared. So I guess that's kind of my recommendation is, you know, just file the report of feasibility and proceed with an improvement hearing, setting a date for an improvement hearing.
May I have any questions for Mr. Emery? Mr. Bitter.
Thank you. Is this going just to the railroad tracks or all the way out to Business 2?
I did right now for cost estimate purposes, I went all the way to Highway 2.
Okay.
Yep.
Anybody else have anything? See none, sir? Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Number 3, discussion on establishing a quiet zone. Mr. Emery.
Thank you again. I apologize, it's been a while since I brought this back, but when we last had discussions back in March, I've had further conversations, emails with BNSF and stuff, and, you know, tried to get some more, I guess, clarification on a few items. Long and short, what I've kind of found is, you know, BNSF, they would like to see every intersection in the state closed, you know, for safety reasons, of course. So, you know, with that said, you know, if you look at closing intersections, you know, they're willing to provide a lot of incentives to do that. So kind of through the process, you know, what I found, and we did have discussion here back in March about the potential of closing 3rd Street Northwest. With that, you know, BNSF and MnDOT have basically came back and said that they would cover a majority of the costs that would be involved in, you know, upgrading the intersection then of Central Avenue and 2nd Avenue. They would pretty much cover a majority of those costs if 3rd Street was closed. You know, we know at the intersection of 3rd Street, just with the configuration of the roads there, you know, is going to be very expensive. We were probably looking at either a 3 quad gate system or a 4 quad gate system, quad system gate system. Let's say that. So anyway, I mean, we were looking at, you know, potentially $1 million plus. They also did say, you know, a 3 or 4 gate system, I mean, could cost anywhere, the city, anywhere up to 15 to 20,000 in annually for maintenance type costs. So I guess really just looking for direction, I guess, from you as far as if you want us to, you know, continue to proceed. I think the 2 steps, if you wanted to, you know, keep proceeding would be, you know, I do have in there the steps to establish a quiet zone. You know, the city must provide a notice of intent. And then we would also need to provide an application to the Federal Railroad for any alternative safety measures. And a couple of the things right now, I mean, we know at Central Avenue and also at 2nd, the medians that would need to go in there to be what they consider a supplementary safety measure, they need to be a minimum 100 foot in length. But with the adjacent streets there, we can't get that, so we'd have to, you know, submit the information and get approval from Federal Railroad to have the, you know, basically the shorter medians. So I mean, there's some things we still need to do there. So, you know, again, just looking for input from you, if we want to keep working towards establishing a quiet zone, if you want to consider the closing of 3rd, or, you know, what your feel is on that too. So I guess with that, I'll just kind of open up for some questions.
So you mentioned BNSF and MnDOT would be up for maybe covering some costs.
Yeah, and I included even in your packet, I included some email correspondence that I was having, with BNSF and stuff, and, like Richard Scott that I've been dealing with BNF, he said, I'll confirm for closure of 3rd Street, the estimated costs of items listed for 2nd Avenue and Central Avenue would be fully covered, except for the pedestrian lights and gate system. Did get some clarification on that also from him. He said given the speeds of the trains, the fact that we only got one set of tracks, we wouldn't need to have the full activated gate system that closes automatically. We could get by with more of a manual type gate like they got in Grand Forks. So I think right now I included 7,500 or something in there, so that went from about 80,000 per crossing down to 7,500 bucks, so fairly cheap. And again, I think, BNSF and them would probably pick up that cost then. They're not going to pay for the $80,000 gate, but I think if we were something cheaper, they would pick up that cost, so.
So what true costs would the city have for
What's
this
that?
whole project? You have the totals above on what true costs from the city's aspect and what we have to budget for? I mean, if they're going to cover some, or is these costs that you're showing here of what the city would have to budget for then?
Yeah, when you look at, you look at 2nd Avenue and Central Avenue, just the construction costs, the way I understand it, they would pretty much pick up all of those costs. The city might still, would be on the hook for engineering related costs, that type of stuff. And they did say, they won't, really confirm any of their numbers on what they'll pay either until, you kind of enter into an agreement and they know you're more serious too.
We're probably looking at $500,000.
No,
Just engineering costs and stuff like that's $495 or $403.
what's that?
You're looking at what you have for engineering, administration, legal, and contingencies, 403. Are you talking are we talking 600,000? Are we talking million?
No, well, that's, yeah.
I'm not trying to nail you down.
No, I know.
I'm not going to say in 3 months from now, well,
Yeah.
Steve, you said this number.
No, I think you're probably, if I'm throwing out numbers right now, I'd probably say you're gonna be more in that 60 to 75,000.
Total city cost?
Does that include
That would-
reconstruction curb and gutter at 3rd?
At 3rd.
Because you'd have to build that
We'd still
road.
have to close that off, yeah.
Would that be the city's responsibility, or is that?
That would, I think, be city responsibility. And I think we had thrown about 50,000 in for that, so, yeah. So I would say a couple 100,000 maybe with some construction that they wouldn't pick up, engineering, that type of stuff.
That's if we close.
Huh?
That's if we close.
Correct. Yep.
So how do we go about getting the appetite for closing of that? What is the process that we have to go through, and what, instead of us going down the road, if we get to that understanding, well, okay, we're going to talk about 3rd Street closure, and all of a sudden it's, no, we're not doing that. Then we go back to, okay, well, now we're up to what, $1.5, $2 million to cover, or, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's, so, I think that's one of the first things we have to figure out if we are going to close that,
Correct.
and is what's the appetite for the citizens?
That was my
There.
thought exactly. You talk to adjacent properties in there about their appetite for closing 3rd Street, and then the whole community would want to engage in the conversation of, okay, to the greater good, what do we gain from a quiet zone in that area? Right? So it's kind of both of those things. There's the greater neighborhood around there that would love to have the quiet zone, and then there are the adjacent properties and others who would say, we need that street open. And I think that you're right, that's step one. Before we let this train go any further out of the station, we need to answer that question. Are we willing to close 3rd? Or is there even the will to do it? And if there's not, then you're back to that bigger dollar number, and we're going to have to come up with a funding source that we haven't even thought of yet.
Right. Yeah, your substantial dollars. I mean, 1.7 million or something, if we don't close it, so.
You'd need some federal, special thing just happening that you could get into or whatever it might be. That would be your only chance at that point, I think.
I mean, do we want to schedule out meetings for this, or how do we want to go about do this then? I guess is my,
Yeah.
I have a question.
sure. Dave, can you answer my question?
Well, I guess I would say is since the main reason we're looking at this was the request that we received from Sacred Heart School, I think the first meeting would be with them and see whether they have an appetite for it or not. Because if they don't, I guess it probably would be pointless to do it with the remaining property owners, because probably wouldn't be moving forward with it at that point. So I think my suggestion would be to start with Sacred Heart Church.
And then have a public hearing, like at a meeting as well, after?
Yeah. I think we contact them first just to see what their thoughts are. And then if they really balk at that, then I guess we bring it back and go a different route. But if they're okay to entertaining it and looking at that, then I would say we call a public hearing and have people go.
Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, Mr. Emery, you said that there was a $20,000 to $30,000 yearly maintenance on these closures, on the crossings. If 3rd Street goes away, is that still true?
No, I think that was with basically like a 3 or 4 quadrant gate system. Is MnDOT saying that there's like a $15,000 to $20,000 annual maintenance costs associated with those gate systems?
But we're still going to have that no matter what?
No, I don't think you would have that if 3rd Street went away.
We did the lesser.
Yeah, because you wouldn't have that gate system if 3rd went away.
So, Mr. Veteran, go ahead.
Can we do like a survey monkey and send it out to the whole neighborhood, not just Sacred Heart, but do the whole neighborhood and say, what are your thoughts? Quiet zone, no quiet zone with 3rd Street closed, quiet zone with 3rd Street open.
We could survey, if we use SurveyMonkey specifically, there's costs involved in that. They're not generally significant, significant, I guess is debatable, but we would need to have a valid email contact for everybody that we would send it out to, which might be difficult to obtain, but not impossible. I guess that's my answer on that.
I think the other thing that you could do is, just like we did for any other type of public hearing where you're going to do some type of an assessment, is you send the neighborhood letters and let them know what it is and have them show up for it.
What's the extent of that neighborhood? Is it the whole northeast?
That would be your decision.
I guess personally, I would look at it, if we would go that road, we would do it the same as if we do for a variance request or something along those lines, where you just pick, say, everybody within, and Nancy has a program that defines that real well. It can go 350 feet, 400 feet, whatever it is from that particular area. It will give you the address and property owner of every person that owns property within that specific area.
And I'm sure we'd want to consider both commercial and residential.
It goes to both. It picks up any property, no matter what it's zoned.
I'd like to have a good idea of the whole area.
I would too.
Not just
Sacred Heart.
I understand Sacred Heart, what they were ones that came forward for this mostly. And there has been other community members have, voiced this in the past. It'd be nice to.
Yeah. Then if that's the case, then what we could do is in the letter we would send out, we'd have to work with Mr. Emery there and try to put something into like on a one-page sheet, maybe showing how that would look if it would be closed, so that they could get a visual for it. But yeah, that's something that we certainly can do.
MERS.
It said that the quiet zone needs to be a half mile. It looks like that would fit. Does it connect to the Grand Forks one? I don't know about the regulations. Do they have to go when they're going across the bridge? Or would that be considered all quiet all through downtown Grand Forks, all the way out to?
Well, I mean, Grand Forks has the quiet zone.
Right,
all
I'm
the
just
way
saying,
through
like-
town,
They only
so-
blow at public crossings. So if Grand Forks is all quiet, I think when we talked about it, they said they'd basically start at our side of the bridge.
Okay, because it seems like I've seen them on the bridge, and it seems like they're blowing their horn, so I just wanted to make sure. I don't know what their regulations are exactly, that
Yep.
they're just,
And they probably do start blowing them on the bridge, for that third zone.
I just want to make sure that this would be a continuation of that quiet
It
zone.
would be, yes.
All the way through.
Yep,
Okay.
all the way through past Second. So I think the next crossing is probably right east of Portamix there. I think they got a crossing.
Yeah, that would also go over. That just bugs the mayor.
I don't know if they would blow, I think.
That'll just bug you. It's right in your
Public
backyard.
crossings, And I don't think the one by Portamix is public. So I think the next one would be by the Mallard Bridge.
Any other questions or guidance? I think you get.
No, I think we'll put together a letter, and we'll look at what the appropriate range would be to send that out. We'll get that sent out.
Thank you so much. Move on to number 4, review of LaFave Park proposed improvements. Reid.
Yeah, perfect. I've got it, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to put Steve on the spot a little bit. My throat is pretty broken today, so I'll maybe have him do some of the talking since he's pretty aware of everything that we're going to bring forward to you. What he's passing out right now is an engineer's estimate of cost for the conceptual layout that was included in the packet. This was just, he finalized this today and handed this, so we're just kind of all looking at this for the first time today to try to include it in part of the conversation a little bit. I think more than anything today, I'd like to just get some, if anybody's interested in giving more thought on the conceptual idea. We took a lot of the feedback that all of you gave us at the last work session that we discussed it at, and got back together with the landscape architect, with WSN, and he's put forward the most recent draft of this in front of us, with some changes to the parking lot area around the boat landing, a little bit more detail in kind of the way a new road would circle through the lower portion of that park. And we also got some comments from Dana Werner with the Corps of Engineers just about the project and the potential of some of the things that we're discussing. I think in some cases he gave us some information we already expected, and whether or not the properties were bought with federal or FEMA funds, and whether or not we can build on them or do any improvements with those properties. And I think in some cases maybe left it that it seems like it's pretty possible to be able to accomplish what we wanted to at the same time. So with that, Steve, maybe if you have any detail you want to add or add anything to it, and then we'll just open it up for comments. And the last thing I would have then is just a reminder that I put the timeline in the work packet on if we want to apply for funding through the Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails Commission, just the timeline of council meetings and potential discussion we'd be looking at to apply for dollars by the end of July of this year. If that would ever be awarded, should we decide to move forward with an application, we're applying for fiscal year 2021, and the grant period would begin. So it'd begin that July 1st, 2021, and the dollars would be available all the way until June 30th of 2023. So we're applying for a few years down the road, and when we start talking about budget dollars and discussion, I just wanted to make sure everybody had that in front of them as well.
So I guess I'll just kind of follow up on the estimate portion. So just kind of put together a fairly quick estimate, just roughly, what it would take. So the first page of the estimate, we looked at kind of a full build out, to develop the entire area there. Looking at roughly about 1.6 million. I did include in there still about 20% contingencies, because by no means, with this master plan either is it, a full set of plans and specs that you're able to estimate everything from too. So So I still have a pretty good contingency in there. And then just with the overall cost, Reid and I had talked and, said if the city doesn't, have the appetite for, maybe that large of a project, we phase this. So what we looked at is on the second page is phase 1, which would really focus on basically redoing the existing boat ramp, putting in a new boat ramp, so you'd have 2 boat ramps there, completing all of the parking lot area, and maybe some of that access road. So focusing more on, that area. We're looking at, really that's looking at probably about $977,000 just for that area. That's where a lot of your big dollar items are. And then phase 2, would be everything except that, so we're looking at about $695,000 kind of for the remaining half of that build out. So again, like Reid said, I think we can just open it up for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. President. The person that responded to you from the Corps mentioned the setback boat ramps. Did they have an alternative for that, or you just said that they're just going to cause issues?
Yeah, I mean, the alternative would be more, the boat ramp would go right directly into the river, but, we have concern too with the current and trying to unload your boat right into the river. So, I think the recessed boat design probably is a little maintenance. You probably do get some sediment buildup, but I think, probably still the best design considering we're on a river there with a lot of current, so.
And I like this design better than anything, just up and over or something. But, so with the DNR, where are we on their list of boat ramp improvement projects? Nowhere?
Not on the list. As far as I've ever been told, we're not on a list. And the last suggestion we had, I'd have to go back and pull the email out, but the last suggestion we had was that the quickest way to move up the list is to have plans such as this ready with an estimated cost. And once you have that, come back to us. And then, we can start having a conversation at that point.
And I think that's the right path. But so now is the lot attached to these boat ramps, is that the bituminous lot? Because I thought MnDOT wanted, they want gravel lots or like impervious or non-impervious.
That's one thing.
That was the core, and I think the core is okay with it.
Yeah.
With asphalt.
Because they would actually.
Email.
Yeah.
Okay, because I even remember when we were talking with them in 2010 or 11, the designs that they had included, gravel lots or whatever. So, I mean, that'd
Which
be
I know I'm like MPCA too, they consider gravel even impervious, so.
Right. I just go around a lot of the DNR
And again,
ramps
that's one
and
thing
they're
Ron's.
au naturel. They allow for some curb and gutter and stuff and have that. So, I mean, if that's the case, if you could curb and gutter and have a gravel lot down there, maybe that's quite a bit of savings too. I don't know what the appetite for something like that is, but it's, gravel's fairly easy to maintain. I know it works at a lot of the other DNR sites. And then as far as that 6-foot gravel walk, is there a chance that we could widen that? I mean, to 10 or 12? I'm just thinking about if it's going to be gravel, you're going to want to be able to maintain it. And 6 gets a little bit small for running a blade or something.
I mean, probably a good idea.
I mean, it's cheap. It's a gravel deal or whatever. I would say widen that out and allow for that. The only problem is then you have to create like a bollard system or something. Not like the bollards we have going onto our dikes right now that are just left open. But, we would have to have that. If it's 10 feet wide, then it would maybe encourage people to drive on it. We don't want that. But I would say widen that path out a little bit. And then the only other things are the hammerhead, I would say in a long-range plan, having some sort of a hammerhead or roundabout or lookout or something coming off of, I don't even know what avenue that would be. If you're going west on First, that first one that goes and comes back towards the river, it just kind of ends, the pavement does. You know, long-term plan, you could have some sort of a wall there, or, you know, some sort of structure where you could park, have it be a lookout or turn around, so people aren't turning on the grass. It could be a hammerhead
So you're
or
right
something
adjacent,
there.
right adjacent to the ball field there.
Right,
on the
and
west
it,
side.
I mean, that could be, talking about legacy dollars, I mean, that could be you could put a marker there that's the forks of the river. I mean, that's probably one of the best views of the river there is. So I would say maybe then phase 3 or whatever, have something on that end. And I guess additionally, if you had some sort of hammerhead on the north going one, just so you don't have people turning around in the grass or something, the better you define where people are going, I guess. Those would be my suggestions.
Questions I do have, you know, his email, he talks about, you know, I guess we're going to be out of luck on comfort stations. I mean, he's looking more of a temporary thing, so I'm assuming that's the route you're going to have to go. But the paragraph above that, he's talking about the green space and our use of the federal and FEMA dollars. Mentioned some, Drayton had to go through that. Have we made sure of that, the review of determining that, if we're going to run into that issue?
That's one thing Ron is actually checking into, Reg, correct, Ron?
I've pulled, I haven't specifically gotten all of it done, because it's a large area. I've pulled probably over a third, maybe not quite a half of the deeds. I haven't gone through them all, but I haven't seen any 404 deeds. However, I have not also looked at previous acquisition deeds to see if there was federal dollars that weren't designated as 404 yet either. And I got a lot left to go over and search and pull.
So let's say we go through it and there's no issues, we can move forward. If there's issues, are we dead? We can't go any farther then?
Well, then it would be depending upon the area. You know, if there was no building of structures on certain area, it has to be green space, and it was up, we'll say up towards the top of the hill, it wouldn't probably limit anything that you were going to be doing along the riverbank. It just depends upon the location.
If we, from a grant funding perspective, if we move forward with wanting to apply for grant dollars, part of the reason that process, that timeline is so long to be able to use the funds is that there would be a stage in that work that we would have to go through all of answering these questions, working with the historical societies and the Corps of Engineers and all the government agencies, because it's a Minnesota DNR legacy dollar funded project. We'd have to go through all of that work before they'd let us put a shovel in the ground. So if we're thinking about we need all the answers to all these things before we look at applying for funding, I think we could probably do that, and all of the dollars being spent are contingent upon all the approvals from all those levels.
One thought I have as I look at this is we have a lot of activity at the boat launch, and we have a little bit of activity at is that a kayak launch right there down at the bottom? Could there be, you know, even out into 10 and 15 and 20 years, some idea of how do we get folks out into those other spaces? Okay, so to the right and left of the kayak area, you know, to start to even, you know, visualize people out into those spaces for whatever reason that might be. Maybe it's more fishing down on the shore, maybe, you know, just whatever it might be, to be intentional about, you know, we wouldn't want just a long trail section with the prairie grass and trees and stuff. I think this is, because of the view and the vantage that we have down here, this is a nice potential gathering place that we'd want to try to maintain that vision of how do we utilize that as a gathering area for people. Maybe, we're thinking of the governor's fishing opener. This clearly won't be ready by then, but where you could set up a big outdoor tent kind of a thing that several hundred people could be in. So a flat, a maintained area for such as that. Maybe that's kind of what you have there with the turf seed and so on. But to somehow maintain that in addition to a trail that's wooded, we would want to maintain that as a place to probably gather larger groups if necessary.
So have more of a turf area that would be mowed and maintained, so you could put up amenities such as that, yeah.
And maybe it doesn't happen immediately, but with that some way provided for in there as a stage in 10 or 15 years from now even.
Good comment.
Anybody else have any questions? So you're looking to go ahead and apply for the grant, or are you saying that you are going to apply for the grant? You don't need our permission to do it, do you, just to apply for it?
No, we certainly need your permission to apply for it.
I didn't know what I mean.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. We didn't talk much in detail about that, but in order, the grant funding that I'm referring to is through the Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails Commission, and they are the deciding commission determines what projects are funded through the legacy dollars, the DNR's legacy dollars. And through their application, the criteria I included in the packet, but one aspect of it is that they don't require a 25% local match, but they ask for, in the application, you receive the strongest scoring in their scoring manual if your local group matches 25%. You can go less than that, you just get less points in the scoring grade. So, for example, in the last round of applications, the city of Crookston got a pretty large approval for the campground at Central Park. Their community matched a full 25% on that project. I don't know, though, that every group that's got awarded or an award has matched 25%. So that's where we would be looking at really now. Between now and the deadline to have a resolution passed would be July 31st of this year. So in the next 4 weeks, basically, we would need to decide, do we want to apply for anything? And if we do, how much are we comfortable with from a local match perspective in some form or all forms of these dollars provided to us?
So are we looking, let's say, next council meeting, we pass a resolution so that you can get moving forth on making sure that you meet the deadlines. So we're saying, okay, well, we'll take, the first page here, it's 1.617, or do you want the resolution to say, no, we want to look at phase 1 and 2, this is what we want you to go for. So that's what you need the resolution to state, that this is what we want, and we are willing to look at matching 25%.
Yeah. I think maybe what I could do is, because we have a couple of meetings, as long as the meetings stay scheduled as they're planned, in our RCA tonight, I think maybe for the next work session following the 4th of July, I could bring a sample resolution to the group of what the resolution would look like, and then a little bit more detail on the grant information. I can get all the background work written and done and have it ready. And if the group decides to pass a resolution at a meeting later in July, it's just as simple as sending the email off and it's submitted. So we can have all of that background information together and then have a little bit more discussion on the actual dollar amount the next go around.
Mr. Kelsey, did you have something?
I'm just curious, is the matching funds, is that going to be cash or can it be in kind?
Some portions of it can be in kind, but I need to look. I don't have the guidelines in front of me to see the exact detail of what. There's a long list of what's acceptable and unacceptable for both in kind and cash contributions to it.
Murphy.
Typically on these grants, then we would not need our 25% until the time of the project, which would be, what you're saying, 22?
Correct.
So, yeah. So
and you can, sorry to interrupt, but you can space that over that whole 2 or 3 fiscal years.
Mr. Demers.
Thank you. Do you have enough to go ahead and start conversations with the DNR on the boat ramp as a parallel track? I mean, from engineering, or is there certain drawings that we can give them to say, here's what we've got, let's talk?
Yeah,
Not mentioning that we're also looking at legacy
yeah.
track as well.
I think so. I think we can start that conversation a little bit. And I don't know that we should start it in the next few weeks, because I know that current regional parks and trails manager is retiring, I think, at the end of this month. So there's probably going to be a little transition there. But I think with what we have here, we can certainly get that conversation rolling.
And then I was also wondering, is there, and this is kind of a small dollar item, but like a wayfinding or trail demarcation portion that we have to meet to be part of the Red Lake River Corridor grant process? I mean, we should probably figure in what, if there's any cost to that.
Just for the signage and wayfinding part of it?
Signage or
Yeah.
wayfinding and that kind of stuff that I'm sure that group will want to have.
Absolutely. Yep. And some of that we're already working towards. Some of the projects, we had some projects awarded in the last grant period, which we had a local contribution that you all agreed to last year about this time. There's some signage and wayfinding included in that. The kayak launch that's shown on this map, that's actually already approved. We already have funding approved for that, and the signage and wayfinding would go along with it. So we'll go through that in a little bit more detail, but I think a lot of it might already be covered with all the different partnership work we've been doing there.
And what was our match on that last one, 25?
I can't recall off the top of my head.
That's what I was thinking, it was 10.
10,000? 10%, yeah. Somewhere in that area. I can bring that back to the next meeting.
Anybody else have anything for you? Good to the order. I think you have your direction. Okay, wonderful. Move on, number 5, request for dryland training space at VFW. Reid.
All right. Thank you again, Mr. President. Judd Sells is here tonight as well. He's representing the Blue Line Club. The request we have in front of you, if you're all familiar with the VFW arena, in the southwest corner of the building, there's an area that we call the shooting cage. It's a kind of a half wall, 4-foot tall wall, boarded off, and then it's got the chain link fence that rises above it, with usually a net or two set up inside of there. It was intended when it was built to be exactly that, a shooting cage for kids to practice on their shots. I think over the years it's developed into much more of a horseplay cage than it was a shooting cage. So we have that in the arena currently. I would say for the last year and a half safely, the Blue Line Club has been kind of discussing at their meetings the idea that they'd like to see a better or a bigger space to do dryland training, dryland hockey specific dryland training. We go to some of the other communities within our region and see what some of their arenas have added on, or their youth hockey groups have built, and I think the goal is to try to find something similar to that. At one point they were discussing whether or not they were going to try to find enough dollars and funds and come to the city council with the idea of even an addition to one of the buildings to be able to build a really nice size space like this. And in lieu of a lot of the conversations that we've had in the last couple of months about our ice arenas and the study that we're going to put forth, they've decided that they were going to obviously wait a little bit on some of those plans, but still want to try to find something in the interim that can help accomplish some of the off-ice training goals. So the picture that was included is the proposed area, which would remove that shooting cage as it exists today, build out the space a little bit bigger, with hopefully a little bit more specific skill development equipment and a little bit more supervision that would go behind how the room is used and how it's operated, to make it hopefully have our coaches have more of an appetite to get their kids in there and work on shooting and all skill development as it relates to hockey. So really, I think the biggest thing is just if you have any questions on it, and hopefully getting approval from the council to use the space in that way and to accept some donation dollars from the Blue Line Club to make it happen. course, Judd, if I missed anything, feel free to jump in, or if anybody has any questions for Judd on any of it.
Anybody have any questions for Judd or Reid? Judd, do you have anything to add, sir?
No, I think he said it about as best he could. And like, I guess the biggest point is right now with the way the arenas are sitting, or we don't know really what we're, which direction we're headed. I think this is the best scenario that we could have chosen, rather than, like Reid said, trying to add on to a rink or, put it in a different corner or whatnot. This area right now is being used, but probably not to its best ability. So I think, like you said, right now with where we're at, this is the best area for us, or for the kids, I should say.
Good. Mr. Demers.
Thank you. I think looks like a nice improvement. The only question, it always ends up, how does it get scheduled, managed, maintained? What's your, say a hockey camp comes in and rents from you, are they going to have access to it, or is it Blue Line Club only, or,
Yeah, that's a good question. And personally, I shouldn't say personally, our view as, from the Blue Line Club is that we want this for our kids, meaning East Grand Forks youth hockey players or high school players. So, we don't want to spend this kind of money to, just to have an open door and let every kid that comes in the rink go in there and fire pucks. It's not going to be like, what Reid said is going to the horseplay area that it is now. This is more of a training specific area where, like Reid had mentioned, hopefully we can get our coaches in there to oversee a bit, but at the same time have an open door where, if there's one kid in the rink and the girls are figure skating, he can still be in there and firing pucks or stick handling or whatnot.
Does everybody that's in the program have to be Blue Line Club member, or no?
We encourage that everybody's a Blue Line Club member, but it's not required. It can't be required. It's a voluntary organization to join. But I think a pretty strong percentage are that the Blue Line Club does a lot of legwork to try to get every family to be a member of the club.
I just, the obstacles that are going to come up in the future. It's going to be, it was paid for by one group, so they're going to claim ownership of it, but it's in a public facility, and certain people are going to want it, and we don't want it not maintained, or, just, like you said, horseplay or whatever, and have it all wrecked, so it's got to be supervised. So are you going to have the staff that are going to be on hand if it's not Blue Line Club that has the key to the door, are we going to have the key to the door and we can get in with our, like, if it's just a regular hockey practice, or, what I mean, if it's not a Blue Line Club group, if it's,
it's not specific to the Blue Line Club. It's more specific to our youth hockey, which is totally different.
Right.
So any youth hockey member, or that plays in our association, or can use it now. Like in Red Lake Falls, they just put a sign on the door. Now, do I think we need to staff it? I don't think so. Absolutely not. But if a rink attendant is walking around and he knows there's no East Grand Forks hockey players, a lot of times you see their hats, their helmets, their gloves. There's going to be certain things required to wear in here probably as well. If they have skates on, they have to have helmets on. So you can recognize that stuff, but I don't think to the extent where we have to hire somebody to just strictly look over this, this area. There's enough people around in that rink, and like I said, posting a sign on there and for East Grand Forks youth hockey, just like Red Lake Falls has done. And I think it will just, you're going to have some kids probably try sneak in there or go in there, but I don't know that, like I said, we have to hire somebody to watch it.
And I wasn't thinking hiring. I just want to make sure we're foreseeing the conflicts that are going to potentially happen.
Right. We don't have the exact, this is how we're going to monitor the room figured out, but we've discussed it a little bit. We've had a few conversations about, it's not any different for us really in supervising than our locker rooms are. It's those rooms stay locked until somebody requests a key for it, and then we unlock it so that kids can get in and use it. This would be in some form a similar thing. We've talked about if it's a locking door with a key code that the right people, the people that have access know the key code to get in, or if it's even more advanced than that and it's a swiper like we have to get into our green site, some form, some way to be able to make it accessible to people when they want to use it and not require us to have a staff person standing with their arms crossed watching the room the entire time either. So, I think that's not a concern for me operating the building. I don't think that's anything outside the current realm of what our employees are asked to do when they're there, is being mindful of everything that's happening. So I don't know that I have the exact answer of how it'll be monitored, but it will be.
Is it
Certainly will
not just
be.
like an open hockey kind of?
Yeah.
I mean, it's no different
Right.
than monitoring an open hockey where
Yeah.
it says in the schedule for East Grand Forks hockey players only, but very rarely do you find a Grand Forks or a Crookston kid around that's, never. And I would assume the same here. I mean,
Mr. Demers? Mr. Rebel?
At the Park and Rec Commission, we also talked about a possibility of doing a scheduling, or we can schedule it. We've even talked about putting up camera systems so we can monitor it any time. We can go to look to see what the behavior is going on in there. I mean, if they're in there messing around, we got to get someone over there to get them out. But little tiny things we looked at. We're not sure yet. We're still waiting for see if the council does approve it, then we'll take that step.
But I was getting at is, in the past, we've done like camps, or not, we've allowed camps to come in.
We still have one right
Right,
now.
I'm just saying, we've done that. They probably bring in kids from all over. Is that going to be part of an area that's accessible to that camp?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say so, absolutely. It's in our building, and it's an amenity our building offers. If it's something that they have an interest in and they're willing to, if we want to negotiate a price that's included to have access to that, that's within our full authority to do so.
And those will be supervised.
Right.
Anybody else have anything else? See none? Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
thank you.
Number 6, request to start hiring register. Chief Hedlund.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have several items before you this evening. First one is a request to start a new hiring register. As you're all well aware, we just recently completed a hiring process. We're currently doing a background investigation on an applicant that we anticipate hiring later this summer, assuming the background goes the way we would hope it will. Unfortunately, we do have another officer that's currently being looked at by another agency, and with that in mind, we are requesting to start a new process. We had very limited applicants this past go-around, as is the case virtually everywhere in law enforcement right now. As I was reading an article earlier, and one person described it basically as a national crisis, the lack of officer applicants and quality officer applicants. Many agencies are actually reducing their standards and requirements. Minnesota has not done that to this point in time, so we are still being held to the standards, I think quite high standards that Minnesota requires. And we also feel we have very high internal standards as well. We're not going to hire somebody just because they apply and meet the basic requirements. We're looking for somebody that we feel is going to be a quality officer for our community and will fit in and work well with our other officers. So that being said, we did come up with one young man that we think very highly of and anticipate hiring later, but with this potential opening, requesting to start a new process.
Do you have any questions? See none, sir? Appreciate it. Move on to number 7, consider approving memorandum of understanding with Independent School District 595.
This all began back in 2014 when we were awarded a grant from the COPS office to allow us to implement a school resource officer with ISD 595, East Grand Forks Public Schools. That grant funding covered $125,000 towards salary and benefits for basically a replacement officer. We then put an experienced officer, Nick Gunderson, into the schools back starting in the fall of 2015. He's been working in the schools as the SRO for the past 4 years now. Grant funding, various requirements. It actually wound up going a little bit longer than the 3 years because we had some gaps in the replacement officer that we had hired. But we've completed the grant funding as of this past January. We are required by the grant requirements to have a 1-year retention period where we maintain that replacement officer for at least the 1 year. That in theory should have finished up on May 31st when the original MOU expired. Because of those gaps in employment that we had with the replacement officer, that actually will go into January of this coming year. this current MOU would essentially pick up where the last one ended on May 31st. It would essentially continue the same arrangement of a 50-50 costs sharing between East Grand Forks City and the East Grand Forks Public Schools through that January period of our existing officer that is that replacement officer. My proposed my proposal, as is described in this MOU, after that date would be that the cost sharing be on whatever officer is actually employed as the SRO at that point in time. In my mind, that just makes a little bit more sense and certainly makes easier tracking for the position in the future, because if that replacement officer leaves, you're constantly having a shuffle as to who are you going to track. To me, it just makes more sense that once all of the grant requirements have been met, that we share the costs moving forward based on who's actually doing the job. Currently, that's now Corporal Gunderson, but likely he's not going to spend the rest of his career in there. We will likely at some point in time move him to a different position and have another officer take that role. For the foreseeable future, we intend to keep him in there. He's doing a very good job. The schools, I believe, are quite happy with his performance as well. So I don't anticipate him coming out anytime soon, but that's kind of where we're at. Cost will go up, of course, for the schools percentage, and as it will for the cities. But this is, I believe, going to be discussed at the July 8th school board. I plan on attending that meeting as well. So,
Mr. Demers.
Thank you. I think it's been a beneficial program, and hopefully we can extend it out as far as we can and as wisely as we can. I agree. I think we should move towards a understanding that takes the position out of it and just has that person, whomever it is, be subsidized 50-50. Wondering about like bargaining unit negotiations and stuff. Does the school just, do they forego any input on that, or are they fine with us bargaining as we please, and they're willing to continue that 50%?
That's a very good question, and I honestly don't have an answer for you. For the original MOU, they were fine with it. They also knew that it was going to be an entry-level officer, so it was basically going to be capped at a 3 or 4 year officer all the way to the end of that time period. Right. With the exchanges, they actually wound up saving a little money, because had we hired one officer and he stayed in that position for the entire 4 years, his cost would have been higher than the officer we currently have in there, who's been in that position for about 2 years. Right. So the schools actually saved a little bit of money during this time period.
But if but Gunderson's a corporal, right?
Yes,
so he jumps up a little bit.
Exactly. So I don't know what their feelings are going to be on that for the future. I have brief conversation with Mr. Kolnis, superintendent for East Grand Forks Schools, yesterday. He's been provided all the same information that you folks have, and it's my understanding from talking to him that he believes the school will want to move forward in the position. He said his staff continuously tells him they feel it's an important position, so I would certainly hope they'll go forward on it, but I can't say for sure what their reaction will be to that, and as far as you mentioned, the ongoing costs and negotiations, et cetera.
And then I guess the other thing would be is, at first blush, 50-50 sounds legit, but do you guys track like time spent and all those other things? Do you think 50-50 is the right division, or is that just the most convenient? You know what I'm getting at? Is he spending 80% of his time, and we're paying for training and all these other things outside of that, and we really don't have an available officer for, well, I mean, he's available, I guess, if need, but does that 50% seem?
The 50% to some degree is an arbitrary number. It certainly isn't an exact even 50%, because like you mentioned, training costs. If he attends a training school, the city pays for that out of our training budget. Any overtime we have typically paid. Now, we try to minimize his school-related overtime by adjusting his schedule. If he has, for example, if he knows he's going to be working the homecoming football game, for example, or in the homecoming dance or whatever. If it's a major event like that, he adjusts his schedule during the course of the week, so that falls within his 40 hours. But there are certain times, school events that come up, or obviously just general activity. If he winds up with an arrest in the afternoon that takes him into the evening hours, he's going to have some overtime, and the city pays those costs. The 50% in the past, and as I have it in the MOU, is purely based on his base salary and the base benefits.
I mean, it might be something that we want to track I guess, going forward, and just so we know
Yeah.
what that percentage is, so if we ever want to address it, we would have.
It would probably be difficult. We do currently, like over any holidays or school breaks, Officer Gunderson reverts back and works patrol. This summer, he's actually filling one of our open slots on our night shift, on our D shift. So his ability to be able to do something like that is helping us reduce our overtime costs.
Absolutely. And like I said, I'm not opposed to 50/50. I don't want it to be an arbitrary number. I want it to be somewhat justified.
The majority of the arrangements that I was aware of similar situations, I believe Grand Forks used to do 50/50. I don't know if they still are. I think Crookston, the city of Crookston, and the school district in Crookston, I believe they're 50/50. I wouldn't swear on that, but I believe that's the case. So it's a fairly common arrangement, but it's certainly it's nothing written that it has to be.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Murphy?
I guess one thing I wanted to go back to is with the labor agreement. In item 6 in the contract there, cost share subdivisions or paragraphs A and B in there talk about that. So I guess we could maybe find out what the feeling or what the school district feels about that cost of it. But as far as having any say in it, in my opinion, pretty clear that they don't, but they could have a different feeling in it. They're perfectly within our realm, and it does address how the future is, and in addition, future COLA increases will be negotiated and will affect the overall cost of the replacement officer. So, and earlier in there it says that is within our purview. So, but it's probably clarified just to make sure that that's their understanding of the
previous agreement.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything? I see none, sir. Appreciate it. Number 8, consider approving addendum number 2 of the joint powers agreement. Chief Finland.
Thank you. In 2018, our council here approved the joint powers agreement that covers the currently 6 agencies that are involved in the Red River Valley Grand Forks Regional Special Operations Group. It covers for groups involved in that overall group that we are personally involved in, or at least Grand Forks PD, is we have negotiators, SWAT members, and a member on the bomb team. They also have an unmanned aviation systems team and then a water rescue team. We don't currently have anyone on those, although we do have an officer that is a licensed pilot that is interested in being on the UAS and may wind up joining that team the next time they have openings. But that's a whole other story, something we discussed down the road. Where this came about is the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation is interested in becoming part of the UAS team. The use of drones for criminal investigation, searches of people and equipment, and just the use of drones is just expanding like crazy. And so the BCI in North Dakota is looking to be able to access some of the equipment and also be able to provide some of their own as well to the team. And so they've requested to become part of have a member and become part of this special operations group. We had Special Operations Group committee meeting. Basically, the commanders or the representatives from each of the 6 agencies met about 2 weeks ago, and we discussed this. None of us could come up with a negative, so we feel that if anything, it's going to be a positive, because it's one more person on the team that would then be able to respond if there is an incident. Say, for example, if Grand Forks County or whatever, if there was a need, that's just one more body that you can potentially call on and be able to get somebody to come out and respond.
Anybody have any questions for that?
Do they become like a charter member of that team, so they become a voting member as well? Like, I would imagine each of these people need to sign off on it. Do they become a charter member as well?
They would, yes. They would have a representative. I'm our representative. Sheriff Tadman is the representative for Polk County Sheriff's Office. Chief Biermeyer is the representative for Crookston PD. And Grand Forks has their representatives, et cetera. So all those, BCI would also have a representative.
That would be
essentially they would have
they'd be outmanned by quite a few, but that would be my only drawback, is that we're allowing a state or outside agencies outside of local control. I think that Grand Forks and Polk County and everybody inside those have a similar goal. I worry about what happens in Bismarck and St. Paul is
absolutely. That certainly is a legitimate concern. The simple fact that they'd be a 1 of 7 voting member, I don't think there's any great concern, because they would have to convince several other agencies to side with them on anything that was kind of in dispute. And They would also only have control over the UAS portion. They wouldn't be, I don't think they would be allowed to vote in the other areas.
They bring more technology to the table or anything?
I'm not
like
sure.
that?
I believe they certainly would have access for potential grants that we may or may not have as a state agency.
Mr. Gelston?
I was just curious, I know it's a joint powers of agreement. However, because it's the state of North Dakota, is there anything preventing them from borrowing us a drone across the river? I mean, I just know that we always end up in some of these issues with, even with the Grand Forks and the Transit Authority.
I'm not aware of any issues, and there's actually currently kind of two different teams. Polk County Sheriff's Office kind of, for the most part, operates their own team for our county, and then Grand Forks was specifically the Sheriff's Department were kind of the ones that started, along with some former employees from the University of North Dakota. They're kind of the ones that got that portion going, because both of those primary entities are members of the team. They do work together, and at our last meeting, they were discussing how they anticipate working more closely together even further in the future. But right now, it's almost, to some degree, two separate teams that kind of cover each side of the river.
No, and I know, I mean, just by the title Joint Powers Agreement, typically you can enter into them and work on both sides of the river. I've just never dealt with the actual state entity being involved. It's always been a county.
Yeah,
or a city
first,
group.
But it was, it's been approved by North Dakota Attorney General, their involvement, so I guess I'm
Don't we have
cautiously optimistic that
federal
it should be
level
okay.
involvement with our Drug Task Force Joint Powers Agreement? So they,
Yes,
so I mean,
that's true, we do.
it's similar to that.
Any other questions for me?
See none, sir.
Thank you for
Appreciate it.
consideration.
Number 9, review of city goals and plans. Mayor Gander, and you have
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Oh,
And it looks like Mr. Murphy has put together some good things here too. As we look back, and you guys can open up to some attachments that came with the packet for today. But some general questions I have on the front end, first of all, to take a look at the progress that we've made toward the goals that we identified in a planning session in January of 2017. And we did have a whole bunch of them, and we brought them down to the top 10. We did put the dot on the page, and we did all bring our thoughts together to what were our priorities and hopefully the community priorities at that time. So what's the progress that we've made toward our goals? And of course, looking at the items yet to be accomplished, what have we not completed? And then to consider when should we repeat the planning session? And part of that's going to come down to, how many of these goals have we accomplished, and how have things changed where maybe we need some new goals that we hadn't identified. And then finally, just generally, at what intervals should we hold these planning sessions? It's an all-day thing. It's time away from other things, but it also is a really good way for all of us to come together and consider what are the greater priorities for this community. And hopefully, of course, with a lot of input from community members throughout the year. And I know you have the handout too, but we identified our core values back on that day as integrity, family, safety. And we had 10 priorities, and I'll just run through them quickly. I'm actually pretty proud of the progress that we've made. And again, Mr. Murphy, you'll have some things to add. Number 1 was planning for all projects with funding identified in advance. You don't get halfway into something and ask how we're going to pay for it. But we're doing it on all projects that we do, and we're doing a good job of it. Whether it's the quiet zone, whether it's the improvements to the park down there, and building maintenance, and we're looking ahead to and we'll talk about some of that too, but even to our arenas, a holistic approach to what are we going to do with our arenas with regard to funding. South End Neighborhood Bridge, I appreciate the joint meeting that we had in Grand Forks, even though it was kind of a tidal wave of folks from 32nd not wanting it at that particular corridor, but that's good public input. I do thank the MPO and all of our representatives to the MPO, both sides of the river, and they're willing to now go back through and look at how do we do a preliminary plan, revising their budget for the year 2020 to kick off a preliminary plan. Did you catch that email that came out, Steve Emery?
Oh.
It came from the joint meeting that you guys had. The two city administrators met with Earl of MPO, and now the MPO is willing to actually hopefully fund the preliminary plans so that you can look at exact alignment. You can look at on 32nd what homes may be affected, maybe none, and to take it to that next level of even getting more close cost assessments. And so they're hoping to put that dollar into there next year. And then he said, Earl and I chatted about this about 10 days ago, and he said, now Merrifield is still going forward, of course, and it may, for right now, it's going forward a little ahead of the neighborhood bridge, and the reason is it's already got that first level of planning completed with some more exact dollars and whatnot. Well, this next year should bring the neighborhood bridge about on par with Merrifield with regard to the detail needed to know cost estimates and so on. So thank you guys for coming out of that joint meeting and initiating the action that would take us to that next level of planning of the neighborhood bridge. So I'm really, for as much as that thing was at a stalemate for 20 years, we have action on the south end bridges that we've not had in 20 years. And it's everybody doing that. To number 3 was examine and consider revising our special assessment policy. It's easy to forget that we redid our development plan. So no longer, to the new council members, the old development plan left it a little too much up in the air when a new plat was being brought in as to costs of streets. And I guess our other new gentleman isn't with us. But so unfortunately, some of the people buying lots did not have a real solid number in front of them to what the cost of sewer, water, curb gutter would be in that development when it was completed. Well, through our revision of our development plan, those dollars will be known. You'll have that all set up ahead of time before lots are being sold, and we've cleaned that up. We still have work to do on our, so that was new streets. We have, of course, work to do on our street replacement policy, see if we can come to some consensus. But that's all under number 3, examine and consider revising our special assessment policy. Great progress. You know, we're halfway through that now to get to the other half. Bring financial reserves to target. Carla, in advance of this year of our State of the City, made it clear we are by any standard at our target for financial reserves. So in 2017, we were really working hard to get there. We're there. And again, that's good work, everybody involved, from city department heads, keeping a close watch on expenditures, to this group right here that sets the budget. And happy to say, and so now you have a bond rating that just improved again in the last year, and you have the likes of American Crystal saying, we like your bond rating, we'd like to utilize that for our private sector investment we want to make back in your community. Good things coming out of all of this. Look at this, number 5, expand Civic Center West and refurbish VFW Arena. We're moving on that. We have a plan, a solid plan in place. We've let that contract to someone to create that concrete plan. Doing well. And number 6, build trust. You don't really know, but that's a work in progress. It forever will be. And any community members seeing this, hearing this, if the media pick up on it, you know, I hope we can all ask, say in the last 2.5 years since January of 2017, are we hopefully building a measure of trust between the decisions that we make and members of the community? I hope the answer is yes. We want to be as transparent as possible, open to the media, open with the streaming of our meetings, and listening, and intentionally listening to their preferences as we build trust. And only 4 to go. Strengthen the city school bond. I fully believe that that's happening. Have great relations with public schools, with our Christian schools that we have in the community. Pretty often have communication back and forth. Going to be, and y'all are invited, by the way, to the ribbon cutting ceremony that will happen at Sacred Heart School coming up, and you'll get a detailed email about that. And again, that's going to be continual. It's going to be, you know, whether it's our ice arenas and the partnership that we have there, whether it's other facilities that we have that we can share, events that we can work together on. It's good. Number 8, master plan for parks, greenway, and trail system. You know, under that one, we talked about, we will pay special attention to the features of our own park and greenway system. Well, what we're doing in LaFave Park is exactly following through on that number 8 of paying attention to the greenway and trying to go step by step to build and develop that greenway to maximize the potential that it can be. Number 9, amend city charter. I don't know if everybody knows, maybe you all know. Thanks a lot to Mr. Murphy, Mr. Gallstead, who went through the legal steps necessary to identify folks for that charter commission, to get them approved through the whole court system, and now we have a standing charter commission for the first time since like the 1970s. And we're meeting monthly and working through the charter step by step, line by line, making revisions as necessary. And of course, that'll all come back before the council for review and approval. But we're way into that, and that's long overdue. We talked about amending city charter for many, many years, and finally it's happening. And then the last one, upgrade city facilities. You're back to hockey arenas. Proactive approach to the maintenance of our buildings. Future needs will be identified, prioritized, and funded. A lot of that happens behind the scenes with our building maintenance fund. But where there's a necessary consideration of these priorities and funding sources, there again, it's happening. The big glaring challenge, I think, for us will be the ice arenas and the fact that they're going to need this update for the cooling plant. And why not in that same stroke make them better if we can, not just put them back the way they look now, but actually so we have facilities that we're proud of, that are well designed, well built out into the future, and anything else under facilities. So those were the top 10 that we've identified. We almost have to have another planning effort just because so many of them are nailed. And there are some that have changed. You know, we'll want to talk about that, to new challenges that have emerged. And if you ask me, one of those is it's citywide, Grand Forks, East Grand Forks, and it's nationwide. And that's the challenge before us with regard to bricks and mortar retail, right? That's a big, big challenge. And how do we make sure that what we have is strong? How do we attract more bricks and mortar retail where we can, and maybe repurpose some facilities that have to be repurposed because they won't ever serve exactly as they were, right? So that's one, I think if we had a retreat right now, that would certainly want to be one that I'd want to talk about. I don't know about anyone else. And so we can talk about when to convene and set some new goals. And I would hope as we would prepare for that, that we would, in the front end of it, be intentional about listening to our community before we would convene that visioning effort, to really be intentional about, okay, we're going in to make another plan here. We want to hear from you right now as we convene that effort. So I guess that I wanted to share. We had these top 10. I am really, really proud of the progress that we've made. It's happening in so many different ways. Everybody's picking up a part of it. And then to consider when might we want to take that up again. Is there anything we're missing that needs a little bit more of a focus? And that's what I would offer.
Have anything to add, or Mr. Demers?
I would just say that we should have it every 2 years. I mean, it makes sense. You have usually a new council every 2 years.
I think that'd be a very good interval. Yep. Maybe early next year, just because we have.
Well, that would be this year, wouldn't it? I mean,
yeah.
2019. So.
It'd probably be, winter tends to be the best time because it's hard to find all 8 of you guys to give up a Saturday in the summertime.
And I guess it wouldn't have to necessarily be that first, year after. I think sometimes if you're a new member on the council, you might be, sometimes feel like you're drinking on a fire hose, so maybe that next year even makes more sense where you kind of find your footing. But
January of an even year rather than January of an odd year.
Possibly. But then again, you've also gone through an election cycle that you've probably heard a lot of what people are. It's probably the most in tune with how people are feeling is usually during those election cycles. So, but I wouldn't mind doing it in the winter of an even year. I mean,
we'll be on a big push now for budget, I think, to the end of the year to get that locked down. And so maybe early part of next year would be a good time. And then every couple of years, I think, is a good interval.
Okay.
I'll put it down on the schedule for in January. I'll work on it with that as the timeline.
Good, and really good job. The more we look at this, I'm pleased.
Okay, thank you, sir. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
We got one question, if you may. We got 5 Tuesdays in July. Just would like to entertain whether we want to take the first Tuesday off rather than the 5th Tuesday.
Probably not. I don't know how it works administratively for bills or any standard business, but it makes a good idea. It's a good idea.
That's right before 4th of July, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's next week.
That's next Tuesday.
We
Stuff that has to be
already have a
approved.
hearing set for July 2nd with Eric and Crystal coming in.
Okay.
That's that.
Otherwise, it probably
Guess that
wouldn't be a
kinda
bad
tells
idea,
us.
but they plan on being here, and that was
Probably
set
be a
and
good
published. So you can be absent that day.
Just make sure we have a quorum.
You won't be here,
Just
evidently.
throwing it out.
I agree with you.
Good idea.
I think Demers had the motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Reapel seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried, means adjourned.